Hello, everybody. Gentry Estes here at the Courier-Journal office alongside Jon Hale. You may have figured out by now I am not Jeff Greer.
That is true.
A little older, wiser, a lot less hair. But other than that, I can fill in. And I was at least at the football game on Saturday with John.
With
and
almost
most of our
the
staff.
Entire Courier-Journal staff, it seemed like.
Yep. So we'll talk a lot about that tonight. We'll talk some basketball. We'll have the top 8 at 8 talking about Thanksgiving food. So a lot for you tonight here on Double Coverage. I guess, John, let's start with the game on Saturday. Again, like I said, most of the staff was at Kroger Field, and not a real competitive game. No,
it was not. I think maybe you could have seen that coming with the way Kentucky had played the last couple of weeks, but because the series had been so close the last 3 or 4 years, I think most of us expected another close game. But it was clear from the outset, that very first drive, that Louisville was just way better than Kentucky. And Kentucky did not have any answers defensively for Lamar, which they have not for the last 3 years. But whereas last year Lamar made some mistakes on his own, that was not the case this season. And Kentucky was down big early and down big for pretty much the entire game. And it ended in the way that most of the media picked last week on our website, for sure.
You could kind of see it coming. I felt like even before the game started, a noon kickoff, a little bit of a sleepy atmosphere. There were a lot of empty seats at Kroger Field. It just didn't have the rivalry game feel to it that I guess I expected. I don't know. It was my first time going to a Louisville Kentucky game in person, and I really just felt like Louisville was ready to play, and you could sense it from the start. Kentucky had their moments. Benny Snell's an awfully good football player.
Yeah, he's great.
But you know, I think Lamar Jackson too much. Louisville right now, by the way, has the number 3 offense in the whole country. And you kind of got the sense going in that in a game of those two that Louisville had a lot more ways to hurt Kentucky. And if they got ahead early, it was going to be really difficult for Kentucky to come back, sticking to the ground the way they like to.
Yeah, for sure. I think the only kind of moment where Kentucky felt like they were in the game was actually after the fight on the second Louisville possession. They briefly kind of got some energy, came down and scored.
Crowd got into it for a minute.
They came down and scored the next drive. The drive after that, I think they had 15 plays, and they missed that field goal, the short field goal, and from there it was pretty much over at that point. We're going to get a lot more into the fight and all those kind of sideways storylines later on in the show, but the main story on the field was Lamar and how good he was. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody who watches Louisville or knows anything about college football, but if that was his last regular season game, it was quite the performance to go out on.
Yeah, and we're going to go to some video of Bobby Petrino's press conference. Some interesting quotes. Let's go ahead and watch that here in a minute.
You know what? He surprises me every day. You know, every day in practice, he'll do something or he'll turn around and look at me and comment on his knowledge of the passing game and what he would have liked to seen the receiver do or what the corner did. And it's just so much fun to watch how much he's grown. To me, he's the best player that you're ever going to see. His ability to throw the ball, run the ball, there is nobody that's been like him, and it'll be a while before you see somebody that's like him again.
What's fairly telling to me, John, about those quotes is, I mean, obviously, he's calling Lamar the best he's ever seen.
Yep.
And that didn't sound like a comment from a coach who's preparing to have him a lot longer. It sounded like a coach who is now into the tribute phase of Lamar's career. And he had a similar statement to SEC Network cameras after the game. Just, you know, how much of a joy it's been to coach Lamar. And I think you're starting to get the first signs now that Lamar's got one more game left for Louisville.
Yeah, and it was interesting in Mark Stoops' press conference. He was asked if he had ever defended against a quarterback that difficult, and he said he didn't think he had. He couldn't think of one who was harder to defend against Lamar Jackson. And just listening to
Matt
Mark
House said the same.
Yeah, listening to Mark's radio show just before we went on the air here, he referenced Bobby Petrino's comment, that clip we just saw there, and said that's not Coach Petrino just saying that for a reason. That's true. I mean, Lamar is one of the best players you'll ever see, and obviously he made Kentucky look really bad Saturday. Several teams have done that defensively this season, but you have to first and foremost give credit to Lamar and just recognize how good and how talented he is and what he's meant not only to Louisville but to this rivalry the last 3 years.
We have a story, and Jake Loram, our Louisville beat writer, wrote a story today that compared the numbers from Lamar from 2017 to 2016. He had a better year this year. Statistically, obviously Louisville's team didn't, but statistically he had a better year. And I think at this point, would you expect he's a Heisman final? I mean, he's not going to win the thing, but he's probably going to get to go to New York.
Absolutely, and there were several UK players after the game. I know Courtney Love specifically said that he should win the Heisman. Mark said during the week that he should absolutely be in New York for the trophy presentation. If he's not one of the 3 best players in the country, I don't know who else is playing. I mean, I haven't seen every team in the country, but I find that very hard to believe. And he's not going to win because of the record and all those things you said, but he absolutely is maybe the most outstanding player in the country, I think, this year.
I think it's a sign that people going into, and we knew going into the season it was going to be really hard to win it twice, that you were going to have to do something even more than what you did last year, which he's been very close to last year, but yeah, Louisville's team took themselves out of it. It just seemed like ever since the Clemson game, you know, the team kind of struggled to recover from that, and then you never really heard much of Lamar in terms of Heisman hype beyond those top few guys. But I feel like for Louisville's perspective, they're playing their best right now, but for UK, they now go into they now go into a bowl game. I mean, it was a 7-5 season, and John, when you look at where they were going into this year, if you hear 7-5 going back to a bowl game, it's hard not to take that.
Yeah, I think that was probably the bare minimum for success going into the year, but Fletcher Page, our colleague, wrote a column after the game that I think nailed it right on. You cannot feel very much more differently about 7-5 years, back-to-back seasons, than you do now, with the way this one ended versus last year. When they beat Louisville a year ago, all the momentum was with them. They got, I think, like 10 commitments in December in recruiting based off that win. Everything was going really well for them, and the bowl game was just kind of the cherry on top, and it didn't matter what they did against Georgia Tech. This year, it's the exact opposite. You get blown out at Georgia, you get blown out against Louisville, your biggest rival. You look really embarrassing doing it with the way that Jordan Jones and some other guys acted in that game. And now Kentucky absolutely has to win whatever bowl game they go to this month to salvage this at all in the eyes of the fan base. Mark Stoops spent an hour tonight on his radio show defending that very many of those complaints and people calling in and complaining about the defense not being better 5 years in with a defensive head coach. But first and foremost, I think the biggest issue is the discipline and the embarrassing behavior of some of those guys. On Saturday, Mark spent much of his post-game press conference talking about that. We've got a clip here with that kind of topic that we heard a lot more about tonight, too.
I didn't do a good enough job of preparing ourselves for this game and this rivalry, and you know, we did not play very good, we did not coach very good, and we certainly did not play with the discipline that and the character that this team has, and you know, that's not acceptable. It's not okay, and I was very disappointed in that.
You're never quite sure what version of Mark Stoops you're going to get after a loss. Sometimes he's angry, sometimes he's really fired up. On Saturday, he was resigned. I mean, it felt like he was a little beat down, and he did not know what had happened, and he did not expect that. He was obviously embarrassed by the way his team played, not only on the field but in the fight and with the penalties in the second half, all those things. That mood that you saw in the clip was pretty much throughout. By tonight in his radio show, he was a little more definitive, a little more demonstrative in his kind of where he's going over the next month, what he thinks was still positive about this season. But it's hard to see for Kentucky fans, I think, with the way it ended the last 2 games for sure.
Rivalry games can be weird like that, where if you're not ready to play and things go against you, it can get away. And I think Kentucky also ran into a buzzsaw in a little bit in that Louisville was clearly up for this game. They were they were clearly pointing to this and had ever since last year's game. You could expect that. But at the same time, Kentucky earned the 7 wins this year. This was a good team. This was a team that could be expected to be a lot more competitive with a Louisville team that had lost to Boston College and had some other games this year that you know, where teams had run all over them. And we did see some of that, but the only thing was Louisville jumped on them so quickly that it completely took Kentucky out of what they wanted to do.
And Louisville had gotten healthier over the last month. I think having Jair Alexander and those guys back made a big difference. But for me, this Kentucky season taught us that UK has passed the South Carolinas, the Missouris, the Vanderbilts in the East. They deserve to be kind of the top of that tier with what they've done against those teams the last 2 years, but they in no way are ready to compete against the top tier of the SEC. The 3 best teams they played this year were Mississippi State, Georgia, and Louisville, and all 3 of them absolutely destroyed Kentucky. So that's, I think, goal number 1 for Mark Stoops. You've gotten to that 7-win plateau where Rich Brooks had him at a decade ago. Now you have to figure out if you can take that next step. You got to find a quarterback this offseason. There are a bunch of questions to do it, but next year is going to be really important, I think, for him and how long these fans stay engaged in his kind of tenure here.
Real quick, you had to name a starter for next year. Is it Drew Barker?
I think right now they're going to visit 4 quarterbacks this week. There's a junior college guy they're looking at. If they sign him, Terry Wilson from Kansas, he would compete for the job. But as of now, I don't see anybody other than Drew on campus winning it right now.
Yeah, I think, obviously Louisville, let's say Lamar Jackson does go pro, I think Jawan Pass is really all you have there if you're Louisville as well. I think that's going to be a key storyline for both teams going into next season. All right, let's move on here. It's time for probably my favorite part of the show. I'm usually watching this from home, and I enjoy watching Jeff and Jon have a lot better banter than I'm probably able to provide here in my pinch hitting role. But it's time for top tweets.
All right, number 1 tweet here is actually from Denzel Ware, who is a Kentucky outside linebacker who was at the center of many of the fight clips that came out on the internet. There's actually a video circulating online of Denzel Ware using a trash can to either hit a Louisville player or basically push him, whatever you want to say, on the sideline from the stands. So for a guy who was that upset in the game at Louisville players, less than 24 hours later, his Twitter account here has auto-tweeted that he is voting for Lamar Jackson for Heisman. So maybe the emotions were high during the game, but clearly some respect still from the UK side.
I don't think that was an accident. I think he was that was his way of saying, giving him his due after that game.
That would be impressive maturity from Denzel, considering earlier in the year he went after a former UK player on Twitter, and then when we asked him about it Tuesday, he said, yes, Coach Stoops told me I shouldn't do that, but I have no regrets.
I'm all about players on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think they should be allowed to do it. But UK is real close to losing those Twitter. This has been all season.
That's 3 this season,
Yep. All right. We got more?
Yep. Here is a series of tweets from several fans, mostly talking about UK's behavior. UK not only played terrible, very unsportsmanlike. The second one there about Jordan Jones, number 34, needs some guidance and to be held accountable. That's interesting because tonight on his radio show, Mark Stoops said that there is discipline for Jordan Jones, who obviously helped start the fight with Lamar Jackson. I think Lamar also deserves some blame in that situation we should make note of. But Jordan had tackled Lamar to the ground and then obviously had 2 personal fouls in the second half on back-to-back plays. Kentucky elected to put him back in the game later, and Mark has taken a lot of criticism for that. He said basically that was because a guy got hurt and they didn't have any other options. But Jordan will not be suspended for the bowl game, assuming he does everything over the next month he's supposed to. He will face internal discipline, same case for Denzel Ware and other guys that were involved. But Mark said the easy decision would have been to dismiss him from the team and just cut loose. He thinks the hard move is to keep Jordan around and to teach him and to motivate him and to get him to be the player and the person he can, which I think is what that second tweet is basically calling for there.
It's amazing how it works that way when a guy's a pretty good player.
That is true.
Yeah. And he is a pretty good player.
He is good.
I think
he was hurt for a while. Missed 4 games this year, but he was the SEC's leading returning tackler coming into the season. So obviously if he is on the roster next year, there was some draft talk about him before the season. I don't think that's the case anymore. He's going to be a big help, and he's a guy Kentucky needs to be not only mature off the field but productive on it too.
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, for Kentucky to take that next step for among the top teams in the league, they need their talented players to also be leaders and guys set it, in the locker room. And I think they've got one on offense. I think Benny Snell's that guy.
Yeah, and they're going to lose their 2 biggest leaders in Steven Johnson and Courtney Love. So other guys are going to have to step up in those roles next year.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move along. We should probably talk some basketball.
That is true. It is a basketball state.
We now are into almost December in basketball, and both teams have gone through the stretch with some, I wouldn't say easy wins, but some wins so far over some opponents that maybe weren't the best. Louisville sitting at 4-0. They've got a big game tomorrow night at Purdue. Purdue is a team that came into the season with a lot of expectation. I think they were picked among the best teams in the Big Ten. They were a ranked team up until the last week when they went to the Battle for Atlantis and got beat by Tennessee and Western Kentucky.
Right.
The Fighting Stansberries, they're from Bowling Green, got them by a few points. So Purdue's no longer ranked. Louisville is 17 in the coaches poll that came out today. 4-0, but they go to Mackey Arena in what should be a tough ACC Big Ten Challenge game tomorrow night. ESPN, 8 p.m. start. I think we're going to tell a lot about David Padgett's team in this game. I don't think Louisville's really been tested. They've been playing home games so far. This is going to be tough. This is going to be a tough environment, and Purdue will certainly be up to play a ranked team.
Yeah, for sure. It's always difficult at this time of the year when you take that step up in competition. We saw it with Kentucky against Kansas earlier. But for UK road games, the first road games of the year are always difficult. Obviously, Louisville is far more experienced than most of John Calipari's team, but their coach isn't, so we'll see how he responds in that kind of environment for the first time, too.
Yeah, UK gets a good win last night. Looked pretty impressive. Watched most of that game when they played Illinois, Chicago. Yeah, there's been some hand-wringing over this team so far, but I'm not sure that's deserved. They're still very talented. They're more talented than any team they're going to play for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I think for now we've learned a lot about what Calipari has in this team. There's still more questions. One of the guys that he said last night that he figured out, he's finally learned what he is Kevin Knox. He had a career high with missing all of his three-point attempts, which I think like 37% of his points had come from three this year. So he did a lot of different things. I think we have a video clip here of Cal talking about Kevin Knox last night and what he could mean for Kentucky moving forward and their three-point shooting.
Well, we posted him some, and we also put him near the rim where he can pop out and make shots. But we also, I'm trying to get him to drive the ball. So today he shoots 4 threes, and it's the only shots that he missed. Normally he's not going to miss all those, but I don't mind him taking 4 threes. I don't want him taking 7 or 8 threes. Quad A goes 2 for 3. He probably should have shot 5 or 6. He's the one guy that I would say, and you would say, let him shoot more threes, and I'm telling him to.
Gotta love that Gatorade angle with the product placement for Kentucky there, getting Gatorade and,
like
and
Nick
Coke
Saban's Coke bottle
and all their press conferences.
Mm-hmm.
But that was Cal talking about three-point shooting. We're going to have a story about that later in the week. That was the biggest question for Kentucky this year: is could they shoot it enough? And it appears the solution has been just don't shoot it very often and make sure the attempts they get are high-quality ones, and then the hope that you make the most out of those opportunities.
Yeah, the schedule really for Kentucky, they don't play a lot of games for the next few weeks, and then the games they do play, it's not.
Yeah, it's one. I think they have 5 games total in December, 1 game per week pretty much. They've got Harvard coming up Saturday, which is a team I think people thought might be pretty good, but is actually terrible. I think they've lost to 2 teams outside the top 200 in KenPom already. Then they go to Brooklyn to play Monmouth, another bad team, before Virginia Tech, UCLA, and Louisville in a stretch there, where obviously we'll learn a little bit more about Kentucky in those 3 games as well.
And speaking of Louisville, equal opportunity here on the video. We have video of David Paget's press conference on Monday talking about tomorrow night's Purdue game.
Playing on the road is never easy. This is about as tough as it gets, and I know they'll be ready to go. Purdue, I mean, for a lot of reasons. Obviously they probably hoped they were going to do a little bit better last week in the Bahamas. I know they had a very good win against Arizona, and they played really, really well. So they're going to be ready to go. Obviously we played them last year, so we have a little bit of familiarity with each other. But yeah, it's going to be a good gauge for where we are. We're excited about it. Playing on the road is fun. It's obviously a lot more fun if you're able to get out of there with a road win. But it's kind of what makes college basketball and college sports exciting, is playing in those kind of atmospheres. So I'm curious to see how our guys respond and see where we are.
Jon, I say Louisville certainly doesn't have the most experienced head coach in the country, but they might have the tallest.
That's
the guy's
true.
big.
Yeah, he is
a big guy.
Yeah, that's helped. Maybe if they run out of players, he can find some more eligibility to get down there.
But tough week ahead for Louisville. They play Purdue. They play Seton Hall. These are games that are going to be able to tell a lot. They also have Indiana coming up soon.
Yep.
Next week, Indiana will come into the Yum Center. Interesting game for Indiana, too. On Wednesday night, they host Duke, number 1 team in the country. And
should be fun.
At least for the first few minutes.
Yeah, Duke got a scare last night from Florida, but managed to come out there and come back from a big deficit to win that game.
Yeah, I think Florida is going to be a challenge.
SEC basketball really good. 3 teams in the top 10 as of today, 4 in the top 25.
And that's even with Michael Porter getting hurt in Missouri,
Right, yeah.
which I think they would have been viewed as another team that with Florida and A&M that could challenge Kentucky. So, all right, we are going to get to the top 8 at 8 here in a minute, which is Thanksgiving
Food, yeah, exactly.
But first, wanted to talk about the SEC coaching carousel. It's kind of what everybody's talking about right now. I feel like we'd been remiss not to mention this. What happened at Tennessee yesterday was one of the most interesting things I have seen ever as a beat writer. It's covering the SEC.
Yeah.
The fans basically vetoed a coaching hire.
That's right.
On Twitter, and that's Greg Schiano, the defense coordinator at Ohio State. Ohio State, by the way, has one of the best defenses in the country right now, but Tennessee fans didn't like the hire. Word got out yesterday. Well, first off, Florida hires Dan Mullen from Mississippi State.
Right.
I think that's a good hire. I know some people
Absolutely.
might disagree with that, but Dan Mullen does did about as good a job at Mississippi State as you're going to see anyone do.
Yeah, great.
And I think that, word after that gets out that Greg Schiano, who's the former Rutgers coach, former Tampa Bay Bucks coach, was the choice at Tennessee. Tennessee fans didn't like that.
That is true.
And the response on Twitter was overwhelming. You had state politicians involved saying they didn't want Greg Schiano. And sure enough, John, by the end of the day, it was off. The deal, they had reached a memorandum of understanding, and now all of a sudden he wasn't the coach. Now, I ask you, the precedent this sets here, that social media can stop something like this from happening. What was your read on this?
Yeah, it was interesting. My biggest takeaway is that a lot of Tennessee fans, truthfully or maybe using it as a scapegoat, were using Schiano's ties to the Penn State scandal and Jerry Sandusky, which were very loose and pretty much non-existent in terms of actual legal charges. He was very loosely tied to that many years ago. Had escaped mostly with his reputation intact, had obviously gotten a job at Ohio State, but Tennessee fans were using that as the reason that he was not good for Tennessee, that they should not move him on. That's, I think, what many of those politicians were using. When in reality, for me, if he's a coach they're more excited about, I think you look past those things, and so maybe that was a little bit of a scapegoat.
Agreed.
So I don't know if that situation could come up again because of the off-the-field factors that were involved here. But either way, it's really scary, and I don't really know where Tennessee goes now. I don't see how that athletic director can hire a coach now that anyone's going to be excited about after bungling it as much as he did yesterday.
That is unprecedented.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't think you've ever seen anything quite like that. I mean, yeah, who's going to want to deal with that fan base? I mean,
yeah, and they might have to pay Schiano some money now too, because based on which report that he had signed the contract already. So.
Wow, I don't see how it could possibly go much worse than that, really.
Exactly.
But you're talking about a team that went 0-8 in the SEC. Tennessee has lost the most recent game against every other team in the SEC. This is a once proud program. I covered Tennessee for 2 years, and this was back in the Philip Fulmer days. The offense coordinator at that time was David Cutcliffe, who is now at Duke. They should hire David Cutcliffe. I said this on Twitter. I've said this for months. He's about the only option I think they have left for somebody who cares about Tennessee and would want the job even despite all these other flaws, and the fans would support him. You hear T. Martin, maybe the coordinator at Southern Cal, former Tennessee
Kentucky
quarterback.
Former Kentucky assistant.
Yeah, and why isn't you mentioned this to me earlier? Why doesn't anybody mention Neil Brown here?
Yeah, I thought he was going to get a look at some of these Mississippi jobs, although Ole Miss kept Matt Luke, their interim coach, made him the permanent. Maybe there's some NCAA stuff coming down the pipe there where the interest was low in that job. Mississippi State obviously is open now, but the early names are Jeremy Pruitt, Alabama's defensive coordinator, Brent Venables, Clemson's coordinator, so Neil Brown has not been mentioned prominently there. He's a guy who was a coordinator in the SEC at Kentucky, is as personable and as charismatic as you're ever going to meet in a coach, and has now had very good success as a head coach at a mid-major program at Troy. Beat LSU this year, 9 wins already with another game to play this weekend. Had a successful year last year. If I'm a high major coach in the Southeast, I'm hiring Neil Brown's way on my list to call. Maybe he gets a look at one of these jobs moving down the road. But for Kentucky fans, I think they hope that whatever happens with Mark Stoops in 4, 5, 6 years, whenever Mark Stoops leaves on his own volition or if it goes the other way, that Neil Brown's available. I'm not sure that's going to be the case. I think he's going to get a really good job and really soon.
I think for Louisville, you almost say the exact same thing about Jeff Brom.
Right.
I think if Jeff Brom was always that coach in waiting kind of for Louisville, and now he's doing so well at Purdue, I think he's got another option ahead of him. Maybe not this year, but very soon. He's got Purdue in a bowl game, won 6 games, just beat Indiana. It was a heck of a season for a team that was picked near the bottom of the Big Ten.
Yep.
All right, moving on. Top 8 at 8.
It's bourbon and hot sauce and Steve Jones, Jennifer Lawrence. That's all the good things about Louisville.
All right, so we're probably a week late on the Thanksgiving side, but it's what's on your mind. Everybody got to enjoy their Thanksgiving.
Still recovering from a lot of food last week.
All right, so I'll start it off here. If you've never seen this before, there's 8 things, and to me, what better place to start than banana pudding?
Yeah.
It's maybe not a side, but I don't care. I enjoy banana pudding, and I had some this week, and it was glorious.
Yeah, I think that's technically dessert, but I'll give it to you because my first Thanksgiving side here is also not really a side. It's just gravy because
So give us some of that gravy.
Spoiler alert, I don't actually like a ton of these Thanksgiving sides, but the solution is if you put enough gravy on them, any of them are edible. And the great thing about gravy is the gravy I grew up eating with my family is completely different than the gravy I had last week with my in-laws, and all of it's good. It does not matter. It makes everything better.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's a very true statement. And somewhat tied to gravy are rolls.
Yeah, great pick.
And because I drove back and forth between states this week and saw that Cracker Barrel was saying that rolls are like spoons that you can eat. That's entirely true.
Yeah.
You sop up that gravy. You got to have a good roll, maybe two.
Yeah, our dedicated viewers who remember our comfort food list will know I'm a big fan of bread. Crescent rolls, my go-to bread for Thanksgiving, though.
May not be with you on this one, though.
Yeah, I have to find a vegetable to eat. I'm not real good about eating vegetables, and so I have to find something with some color on my plate. Green beans are the kind of the best of the worst vegetables for me. I had some green bean casserole last week that was pretty good. So if, like I said, I'm not great on these Thanksgiving sides, but I had to get something a little healthy in there, and green beans are the way to sneak in some vitamins for me on Thanksgiving.
I'm going to no comment that one on the offhand chance my little girl's still watching. But,
there you go.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan.
My fourth one, we're going to have some dueling sides here. I go baked potato, which I did not know was a weird thing for Thanksgiving. We always had baked potatoes or sweet potatoes growing up until my wife joined the family, and she was shocked that we did not have what your next pick is. So I was a baked potato kid growing up. Apparently, though, this is not the most common side dish.
Yeah, and since we're talking gravy, I mean, mashed potatoes and gravy, I wouldn't argue with a baked potato. But it seems like baked potato to me needs a steak with it, not turkey.
No, my wife has completely sold me on this. You picked mashed potato before I saw my list today, so I just added the baked potato. But I think you're right here. I think mashed potato greater than baked potato for a Thanksgiving deal for sure. Yeah. Here is my go-to side dish though for every meal.
I'm with you on
macaroni and cheese. Apparently,
solid number two.
Apparently, some people don't think this is a Thanksgiving food either. Well, they're just wrong. So any meal's made better with macaroni and cheese, and I'm the guy who's 30, and all the little kids at the Thanksgiving table are trying to fill up their macaroni and cheese, and they got to fight me first to get there. So.
And number one, you probably figured out by now, is dressing. Now, I've heard people say it's stuffing or dressing.
Stuffing was what I always called it growing up, but dressing, I think.
Is that like a north-south thing?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Well, I'm from Kentucky. We're both from the south. So.
You're right. So, me being from Alabama, it's dressing, but
maybe it's stuffing for hillbillies like me. Eastern Kentucky.
But it's got to be number one. So there you go. There's our top 8 at 8. Hope we made you hungry, and you ran to the refrigerator, have some leftovers left. All right, ready to pick some games?
Let's pick 6. This week is Conference Championship week, so we do not actually have Kentucky, Louisville, or Indiana for the first time in double coverage history here.
Starting with the good one.
But some games that could affect their postseason play. SEC title game, Georgia versus Auburn.
All right, full disclosure. I did go to Georgia. I also covered Georgia for quite a few years before I came here. I'm going to let you pick first.
We saw this game a couple weeks ago, and it was so one-sided. I don't think I can pick against Auburn at this point, given what they've done the last month. A neutral site, I think, gives Georgia a little bit more chance, and they certainly looked really good when I was in Athens 2 weeks ago. But Auburn's got all the momentum right now. I'm going with Auburn.
They do, and they've been in this place before in 2010, 2013. When Gus Malzahn gets to this point, they are tough to deal with. That said, it's a really tough ask to have to play Alabama and then turn around and play Georgia again the very next week. Alabama, I watched a good bit of that game. It was a physical war, just like you would expect it would be. I think Auburn's a little banged up. They need the running backs to get healthy, Johnson in particular. I don't know. I'm going to pick Georgia. I think the game being in Atlanta, I think it's just one of those things that had Georgia won the first one, I'd probably pick Auburn in this one. I just think these are two good teams. Maybe you don't beat them twice. And I think Auburn has played fantastic in winning 2 great games, but they did that at home. It's going to be a little different when they go to Atlanta and have to play Georgia in Atlanta.
You think Alabama gets in the playoff then if Georgia wins?
I do.
All right. Let's go number 2 here, the ACC title game, Miami and Clemson. Clemson obviously the favorite here, but I am going to go with the upset. Mark Richt and Miami. I know they crashed down a little bit in recent weeks, had some hard times, but I'm all for chaos at this point when it comes to college football playoff, New Year's 6 games, and Miami beating Clemson would be the quickest path to that, so I'm going to go Miami.
You know, I would have picked Clemson even before Miami lost to Pitt, but now I'm picking Clemson big, real big.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
that's probably the right choice. All right, next up, Big Ten, Ohio State, Wisconsin. Wisconsin, the team nobody respects, but is in the chance and has their opportunity here to prove all those doubters wrong.
All right, Wisconsin has the number one in the country in total defense. Ohio State is number 8 in defense and number 4 in offense. It's a top 8 team on both sides of the ball. I wonder how Ohio State's lost a game, to be honest.
Yeah, it's weird.
They're a very good team, and I think Wisconsin has they've played well all year. Their closest game all year was an 8-point win. They've won their last 4 games by an average of 24. But you could make a case that after beating Iowa and Michigan here recently, their next most impressive win was probably Lane Kiffin's Florida Atlantic.
Yeah, they haven't played very many people.
No, they haven't, and I think Ohio State's very good. I'm going to go with the Buckeyes.
Yeah, this one pains me, but I'm going to go with Ohio State too. When you get to this point and you haven't played great teams, it kind of catches up with you, and this is a spot where it's gonna finally come to an end for Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Big 12 championship game, TCU, Oklahoma. For me, this one's easy. Oklahoma, I think, is a playoff contender. I think maybe a national title contender. Former UK receiver Jeff Bidette actually has worse numbers this year than he did a year ago at Kentucky, but he's going to get a chance at a national championship.
He's in like the best offense in the country.
He's going to get a shot to play for a national title, so he'll probably take that trade. He's probably still not going to get drafted, but I think he made the right decision, and Oklahoma wins this weekend.
I agree. They beat TCU pretty bad a couple weeks ago, and I have no reason to think TCU would be able to stop them any more than they did that last time.
Pac-12 title, Stanford, USC, Southern Cal. Game that
honestly, I wonder how many of our viewers actually knew this game was happening or who was in it.
Or have been awake to watch either of these teams play all season.
No kidding. USC beat Stanford 42-24 back in week 2. See, I got notes here.
There you go. He did way more research than Jeff and I normally do here on
Stanford's won 8 of their last 9, though. They beat Washington, Cal, Notre Dame the last 3 weeks. That's 3 pretty good wins when you consider the rivalry aspect with Cal. Stanford's playing better right now. I'll go with the Cardinal.
I'm going to go USC. I don't know. I don't really have a reason. Just USC.
There you go. Yeah.
Final game here, AAC Championship, 2 ranked teams, Memphis, Central Florida. Central Florida going for the undefeated season before Scott Frost probably rides off into distance at Nebraska maybe or somewhere else as a head coach.
Another rematch. This has been rematched all over the place here. UCF beat Memphis by 27 points this season. It's Memphis' only loss. Memphis is 10-1. They're playing real well. UCF's 11-0. UCF had 603 yards total offense in that game. It's a pretty good sign. I think that they knew how to handle Memphis then. They probably can do it again. They're playing at home, too. This is in Orlando.
Yeah, I think UCF is going to get it done here and maybe get that spot as the mid-major in the New Year's Six.
Yep.
But there are distractions this week with Scott Frost and all the talk about whether he's going to coach.
Memphis is coached, too.
So it might be closer than expected, but UCF gets it done.
Who are your playoff teams, real quick?
I'm going to go Auburn, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma. No, not Ohio State. Alabama, Oklahoma, sorry.
I think Alabama gets in, too. As a result of Ohio State beating Wisconsin, I think Alabama can get in, too. And then, whoever wins Georgia, Auburn joins Clemson and Oklahoma.
Yeah, as we wrap up here, what happens in these games this weekend and in New Year's Six does not directly impact our local teams, but it will kind of indirectly in terms of who slides down, who's available for what bowl games. Kentucky and Louisville both going to find out Sunday what bowl games they're going to. I know Jake and I have both written about their bowl projections this week. I've got another story coming out in the morning about Kentucky, whereas they're almost certainly going, the Music City Bowl, and I talked to their rep today. So we'll find out about that Saturday. But if there is chaos in these 6 games this weekend, that could lead to chaos for our local teams and where they might go.
If it's not the Music City Bowl,
I think Liberty's probably the only other option because I just can't see that Kentucky fans are going to travel very far this year and make that more attractive for any of those other Pool 6 bowls.
I think Music City Bowl, isn't that the same day as the…
It's at 4:30 and the UK U of L basketball game's at 1 on December 29th. They are going to try, if it works out that way, they're going to try and set up a viewing party downtown in Nashville to where fans who were not at the game could obviously all watch it together and then go to the football game afterwards, which would be a pretty fun afternoon if you don't have a ticket at Rupp.
And not far.
Yeah,
Nashville's a good drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
You certainly go there for the SEC tournament.
Right, and the SEC tournament is in St. Louis this year, so maybe this is their annual trip to Nashville. There you go.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, John, it was fun.
It was fun, absolutely.
Like pinch hitting here. Thanks for watching, everybody, and hopefully Jeff Greer will be back next week.
Yeah, for sure.